Hello and welcome back to the channel. So now we're picking up this build in part 2. This is for the Tamiya A34 Comet. Lovely kit. So what we're going to do here is get the painting done. So this is how I do my painting of tanks. I've got to a point now where I'm really happy with this. I don't look to do it any other way. So it's always a base coat with the closest Tamiya colour in the XF range. So here it's 62, which is their olive drab. Spray it all over, no messing about, nice smooth coat, maybe in a couple layers, and then I pick my MRP colour. So that's what I like, MRP, Mr. Paint. This is SCC number 15, which is the British olive drab colour. They do need a bit of a mix, as you can see. People always go on about you can't mix it and you need a ball. Well, you stick a paintbrush in there and just rub around. It's no problem. So what you're seeing here is the Tamiya base coat. I'm going to talk about it in general terms, not scientifically, chemically correct terms for paint. The Tamiya is a base coat over whatever primer you want to use. And then now we just go around in circles and using the MRP, which is a gloss finish, lacquer paint, heavily thinned in the bottle. This is straight from the bottle, I'm not thinning it. I'm just going round in circles, as you can see, and I try not to actually spray into panel lines. You can see there's a bit of overspray. That's fine in this scenario. So instead of just sort of like broadcasting it with the MRP stuff, because it's thin, you can't just like go over with one colour cup full of paint and it will paint the whole model, which you sort of can with a Tamiya or similar type paint. This you need to sort of build up each panel as you go, and then that gives you the effect. We're at a little bit high exposure here because it's glinting. You can't see the colour. It's obviously, this looks like it's like a misty white. That's not what it is. It's the way the light's catching it. But I've used this angle so you can see how the paint's going down. And all we're doing is catching the glossiness of the paint in the camera as opposed to the actual colour. And that shows you how light a coat goes on and how you build it up. And over this hatch at the back, once you've sprayed in all of these doors, this whole area at the back is done. And if you look at the model in blocks like that, I do tend to do the painting over about probably two sessions, maybe, an hour each. That's generally enough. Now you can see the colour as well. So as it cuts through, when we get the light off it, you can see the difference that the olive drab colour it shows, which is what you want. And the effect you should get is like a forced highlight and shadowing. And that's just the start of the weathering. And this is literally, I've put the airbrush down and then I rubbed it like that. That's how quick it dries. And it is hard as nails. So it's very good stuff, very forgivable to work with as you go forward on the weathering processes. Sometimes if you're used to using just acrylics and things like that, you can get problems going down the line of the paint not being as hard when you do the later products. So you can get problems with enamels or when you're scrubbing or something like that. You're trying to be a bit rougher with a brush. This lacquer stuff is very, very strong. It is smelly. It is quite toxic. You do need a spray booth, you do need a window, you need a face mask on, the whole lot. You need it venting out of the window. But if you can use that, I highly recommend this paint. It's fantastic stuff. So now you can see the contrast with the turret that hasn't been done, the hole which has been done. If you ignore the glossiness, which is difficult, I know, what you'll be seeing there is the different paint shade. And I really do like MRP's colours. I always have. Channel is not sponsored by them. I buy all my paints myself, but I really like it. There are other alternatives that I haven't used. SMS is floating about. Looks to be. It looks as though it's a similar product. I haven't used it, so I won't comment on it. And then you've got like Mr. Colour, Tamiya LP range, AK Real Colour to an extent. All of those would be deemed as sort of lacquers. Some of them are sort of lacquers as far as like a Tamiya XF paint is. Others are probably closer to the spectrum of, say, an MRP. So by all means, see if you can get hold of some of these paints if you want to try it and see if it works for you. What I was going on to say, I'm rambling on here, was that you get a forced highlight and shadow. So you're already doing your panel lining. Now I tend to then go over this with an actual panel line wash, but the fading on the panels is the important bit. The way you spray it, where you concentrate on the center of the panel and then kind of bleed it out to the edges where the panel lines are, does a lot more subtle work than perhaps would come through on the video. So it's just the initial stage. You can do it other ways. I choose to do it with the paint, with having a darker undercoat and a lighter top coat. You can do it many ways. Something else that might be worth considering as well, certainly with Tamiya decals, is when you get into this stage and you're putting on large stars like this, it might be worth considering a mask, because this decal is a little bit trying, I've got to be honest. I wanted to do this build out of the box because I think it's important that I, as a channel, show what can be done with models from the box from time to time, because there's plenty of people showing what can be done if you add stuff to it with super detailing. But there's certainly a place for out of the box builds, and that means I'm using the decals. But I did find this a bit of a pain, I got to be honest, and the way the stars split down into 4 or 5 small white bits, and the fact that Tamiya decals are very thick. You'll see I'm here messing about this. As I was doing this, I thought I could just paint this white with a brush, but I thought I'd go through the process for you so you can see it, and we'll suffer together. And you also get a small white bit that goes on top of that handle. I will take a moment here just to mention the handles, or lack thereof. For a 2022 release from Tamiya, I wonder if we should be having handles now, separate, because what they tend to give you is moulded on blobs, and you obviously, if you look at it side on, you can't see through. It's just a blob, whereas it should be a wire handle. I'm sure there's reasons for it, and the modeler that wants it can just cut bits of wire, but other companies are doing it, and I do wonder, sometimes if Tamiya lags behind a little bit, and then they bring out a model like this, and for all you can complain about the handles, the rest of the kit is just so good. Yeah, I don't know. It's something to think about. I chuck loads of stowage on the back of this where all the handles are anyway, so it isn't actually even a conversation. But it's a fair thing to raise, I think, some of the finer details. So as we're still working on this decal in real time, you can see what it takes to mess about with something like this and get it done. And for the amount of time I spent on this decal, and I knew this the whole way along, I could have just used a stencil and sprayed it on, and it would have been done quicker, and I wouldn't have then had to worry about anything afterwards. Whereas there is a bit of carrier film, there is a bit of issue with that, a little bit of silvering, because the decal is obviously inside that white ring. Between the white ring and the star, there is decal film to hold it all in place. So it's something I might go down the line of in the next couple of videos, because I've not used stencils on military vehicles. I've used them on aircraft. So we'll have a look. It might be that we could cut it as well, trace it over the decal. But I think that's fair to say that's enough on the decal. So we'll move on to the next bit. And that takes us on to the tracks. So for that, I'm using this Life Colour set, which is Dust and Rust. And it comes with 4 what you would call rust colours and 2 dust colours. Now, I must mention my friend from who is at our local club, very good armour modeller, who's Dan Brucker. You may know him. He's in magazines, he's on Facebook, etc., etc. And he showed me the basic principle of this. He did it far better than I did. And as usual, he showed me it. About 3 months later, I decided to do what he showed me 3 months before, and I limped my way across to where I got to. He can certainly do it a lot better than I can. But this is the general idea. You paint it black. This is a rubber black. And then you start with the dark colour. So you go through the darker colour of the rust tones. You go up to the lightest tone. Then you cut back in with a wash of the darker tone, and it sort of dulls it down. And then when you go on with your dust splashes and things like that, what you end up with after this process is not meant to be what the tracks finally look like, if that makes sense. So I'm just going on with a sponge. Off camera slightly you can see a plastic spoon. I'm actually putting the paint in there and watering it down. So this is pure acrylic, so it's a bit different for anything I've done on the channel, hence why I needed to be told about it to sort of get it on my spectrum, because I always go down the enamel or oil route. So we're just sponging on this, which is really just thick acrylic paint, and you thin it with water. Once it's sponged on and you're happy with it, it gives an effect. So it's a similar thing to what we were talking about earlier. The black is there to give depth. Then the darker colour goes on top to give more depth to the next colour. All the while, the black is still showing through. So you've got to get that darker colour into the recesses first. Then you can go on with your next colours, as you can see. So this is the rust base colour. And this is much lighter, very bright orange. Don't be alarmed how it comes out the pot. It does. It dries off a much better shade. And again, just sponging on. And you do then tend to be a bit lighter as well, it's fair to say. You sponge a bit lighter. You're not as heavy. You try and let a bit more of that brown to show through, and you go on through like that. Now you can see the black's there, the brown's there, and now the orangey rust colour is there. It's all part of the process. And quick tip, if you want anything to look good, do the same process like this, but using, say, 4 colours. It always looks better than if you use 1 or 2 colours, because it's building depth, it's building layers, it's contrast as well. So that's what your eye likes. And you see we're just focusing on this one side here, so we're building that up. Then we're going to go in with the next colour, which is very bright, it must be said. It is the name of it is proper orange. It's a light shadow 1, so as you can see, very orange. But here we're going much lighter now. So again, think of that layering. We're now going on with just some light sponging here, he says, as he puts a massive dollop on there. Always use your kitchen towel to wick off, and make sure you're not going on too heavy. I'm getting a little bit impatient here, as you can see, so what I've done is watered it down and gone on a bit heavier, a bit too much. But once it's on there and pooling, I've then gone over with a sponge, like a drier piece of sponge, and sort of wicked it off. Like I said, he showed me much more professionally. I'm now just trying to speed through it, as often I do. And then we've got light shadow 2. So that's all 4 rust colours. Now this one is something that you actually go on and use as a wash. And this is something I'd like to explore, is this weathering with acrylics. Because using them as a wash like this, it takes a bit of getting used to, because you can't rub them off. If you put them on, you can't rub them off. You've got to come around a different way, really, is to, like I was doing there, stippling it with a brush. So I'm going to work a bit more on that. Now we're going down back to the original colour, where I've mixed the 2 darkest colours. So that's what I'm doing here. Those 2 colours mixing together now. And now I'm going to make that into a bit of a wash, just like we did that really bright colour. And for that, we're just going to go in again now and do a bit of detail painting. And it's just to give a little bit of depth. Again, if you want to be an animal like me, you can go on like that, like I've done. Sort of get it all on there. And then while it's dry, sponge it. And that will have the same effect. It actually won't be as finessed. If you spend an hour with a paintbrush or 5 minutes with a sponge, it'll always look better if you spend an hour with the paintbrush. But that isn't really how I work, I must admit. There he goes, look. Now he's just piling it on with the sponge. This is the trouble when you want to get through the end of a project. But if you follow all of that, use your finesse and try not to rush it like I was. I'm then going over with a bit of graphite on where the shiny metal will come. And like I said, if you go through that process, once it's all dried, you'll have something that ends up with what we're looking like here. And I'm very happy with it. Certainly better than the way I used to do tracks, which was weathering straight onto the black. At least this is ton more depth. And there you can see, this is what you end up with. Now I do go with the graphite here, and I must admit, I dialed this back a little bit. I didn't like it when I saw it on the model. You've got to be a bit careful with highly polished tracks. As you can see, like that, it's just a bit too much. You know, with all that work we just done, I've gone and drawn over them with a pencil. This is the sort of thing you gotta. This is the sort of thing we're always fighting against as modelers. It's just the way it is, and we all do it. Now, these are link and length tracks. I do struggle with these a little bit, as again we all do with link and length. But again, it's a good way of doing tracks. So I'm going to dip out here for a little bit because it does go on a bit. Feel free to skip past, but if you want to see the process, I'll be back with you once these tracks are on. there we are now, just getting those individual links around the sprocket, and that's what they give you on these link and lengths. You get lengths where it's flat, and you get links where it's curved, and then you can put the links around, join them up with the lengths, and you've got your link and length tracks. So after the ordeal of the tracks, they do look rusty, obviously, against the starkness of the clean vehicle. Don't worry about that, it all ties together at the end. Now it's time to put the fenders on. Again, I wanted to just go straight stock as it is from the box and put all the fenders on and use everything, but it does look a lot better, these models, if you actually take the odd fender off here and there. And they've also got a side skirt to the front and rear of the fender. You can leave one of them off. You can cut it in the section where it's riveted. There's a lot of things you can do, and it always adds a lot more interest. So don't be scared to do that. You don't always have to do it straight like this, as I've done. See that front section and the rear section, those panels are joined halfway. So if you took one of those panels off, it would add quite a lot of interest, I think. So now we're into weathering. All that's happened is a matte coat's gone on, which I seem to have not filmed, but we can work along it. So the first thing is wet mud. I say the first thing because there's a couple of washes that look to have gone on there, but really that's me testing the waters, working out what I want to do as I'm weathering another model. So generally I start with a heavy mud deposit, and for this I wanted to go down the route of trying to replicate a heavy brown mud with a green vehicle, because that's the most difficult, because it's not a high contrast. You've got sort of dark, dull, browny mud on a dark green vehicle, and it does tend to wash together, and it's very difficult to get definition, and then extremely hard to get contrast. I mean, just think if you went over this with a pale sandy dust colour like Normandy 1944, but this thing's trundling around Germany in the winter of 1945, as in the early winter, January, February. It isn't going to be dusty. It's going to be dark brown, it's going to be wet, it's going to be heavy. So that's what we're doing, and for that we're using Ammo products exclusively. No reason, it's what I've got. I would like to add in a few more different ones, maybe some from AK, although they seem much the same to me, and maybe from a few other manufacturers. So we'll see what we can do going forward. So after you've got your nice road wheel cleanly painted with the rubber rim, you then go all over it with these enamel products. But believe me, if you painted the rims poorly, it would show on the final model. You've got to do everything correctly. So what we've done here is we've picked the wet mud colour. That's our base, going back to the start of the video almost. Now we're going on with turned earth. And the idea with this is not to splodge it all over like you have with the wet mud. We've got our base. So now we want to add a bit of depth to that base, which is going to lift it. So if we put turned earth in strategic places, which you can't see because I'm blocking the camera with my hand, and then actually merge it together. So if you think a dollop from the pot in 4 places, and then using the same brush, you go all over the side of the model, sort of stippling it together, what you're going to do is you're going to have darker areas, lighter areas, because the turned earth is lighter. So we're just going on again, we're going over, and the stippling as well helps to remove any big build-ups, which can happen. So you want to be, you don't want like a splat of mud on the side of the wheel. If you're stippling over, then you're going to be making sure that's not happening. So all of that was without thinner. Now I've just gone in with a little bit of thinner on another brush, a wider brush now. As you can see, it's all bent around, and this just takes the height of it down, and I actually mean the height of the enamel product. So what I want is it to be a smooth kind of wet mud rather than tons and tons of splodges. Now you can see where I've just circled there. I've left that because that's nice. That's like a splatter mud that's flicked up off the sprocket. But I had that all over and it was a bit too much for me. So the wetness of the thinner is now just going to level things down a little bit. Once you've done this and you've settled it, you can't then move it. You've got to let it dry. If you want to speed it up, you can use a hairdryer. But even so, this is the sort of thing you do at the end of a session and leave it overnight for it all to settle. And what will happen, it will bleed back, and you will then see what you're left with. You'll start to get the right colours, because when it's wet, it always goes very different to what it's going to end up like. And here we can see it started to dry off, and now we're going back in with some actual washes. So now we're on with enamel washes. What we've been using before are heavily pigmented kind of mud effects. I think they're on the mud effect line. Now these are much more, I think the initials are called heavy mud, so the wet mud and the turned earth. I think these now are called the earth effects, which are essentially enamel washes with a little bit of heavy pigment. And then you go into actual like panel line washes, which is like streaking grime, things like that. So you can see what happens here. Again, this is from the bottle, and what I'm doing is pushing these muddy deposits where I want them. And what we're introducing is yet another colour on top. So now we've got 3 brown colours that we're working with, and that helps with the depth. And you can see the strategic placement of it. It's not just splatting it all over like I do usually do. A bit more restraint here from me, thankfully, and we're just putting it in different places, and it is going to add a little bit of interest. And now it is still the case that you can go back over and stipple it in with a drier brush if you want to, or some more thinned colour as well. And you can raise these colours as well. Obviously there is a limit, you wouldn't want to introduce sort of 5 or 6 colours, but 3 is probably the minimum. 4 is ideal. 5 is probably the extreme the other way. And if you go over the whole vehicle like that, that's where you get the effects that we end up with on this model. So if you like the sort of thing you see towards the end, that's how it's done. It is really simple. It just takes time, and it just takes thinking about, and it takes a bit of finesse. Now, we skipped 10 steps here, I know. What I wanted to do was put it on a base. The base went down a number of routes, and this got put on the side, and I thought, right, it's time to finish it. I couldn't be messing about with the base. So what we've got here is a base I've put together, which has got, it's just foam with balsa wood sides, painted black. The groundwork was built up in a way I wouldn't have liked to have done it, with using enamel products. And then I actually went on and decided to fix it with plaster. Well, it's actually filler. It's filler mixed with paint and water. And that's what we actually end up doing, because you can see the tracks are sort of floating on the top there, and it's all sorts is going on. And at this point I decided to add stowage as well. So what we spend the time on is the stowage. But you can see the weathering there. You see the subtleness, but also you can see how it's not a high impact visual thing, because it's lacking in contrast. And sometimes if you want to be realistic, you just gotta realise it's not going to be one of those models people sing and dance about. But I'm very happy with this, probably more so than I am with most. So what we got is a couple jerry cans, we got some ammo boxes and all sorts of things, and some helmets there, all just sprayed out with Tamiya matte colours, XF colours. Don't worry, trust me, if you've got it and it was around at the time, like I say, December to January 44, 45, believe you me, if it was available, they chucked it on the tank. I have seen jerry cans on the side of a Comet, which I wanted to do because you look at it and you think, there's no way they would be hanging on to the side of the turret like that. It looks ridiculous. There's no rope, there's nothing. I imagine they're tied together with a bit of rope around but you can't see it, and it does look ridiculous. It's like they're floating, but the photos don't lie. And I've used a little bit of artistic license and a little bit of actual reference to place some of this stowage. Surprisingly as well, we all think, oh well, you wouldn't put stowage near where the turret is because the turret can't turn, etc, etc, etc. Well, so many photos I saw had stuff piled up around the turret pin. I guess they just turned the turret if they had to shoot, but more than likely they probably didn't need to shoot the gun without knowing that they had to. That's probably the reality in early 1945 in Germany. I expect when you're travelling from the rear lines to the front, there isn't a lot of need for a Comet to quickly turn its barrel, there would be a lot of warning. But I may be wrong, we'll see. So here, again, using enamel washes. We've got track wash, which isn't just for tracks, it's just a nice brown wash. Got Starship wash as well, which is like a grimy wash. It's good sort of grey, darker wash, as you can see there. It's like a black without being a black and a brown without being a brown. It's somewhere in the middle. And once you go on, if it's too heavy, you just go on again. This is why we love enamels. Although, word of warning, these are pushed into white tack, and they did start to eat the white tack. And the only problem with that was that it sort of, instead of behaving like white tack, it sort of went a bit like chewing gum, which is a bit of a problem. It's hard to get off. So it's probably best to put it on like a piece of wood with some double-sided sticky tape or something like that, which shouldn't have too much of an effect. It is funny what these products react with. Now, I painted all the stowage in this manner. I just went over it without worrying too much, not going ultra detailed. But I did think it was worth actually, going over and giving them a wash. The other thing as well is where you chuck on some jerry cans, especially late in the war, they're the Dunkelgelb colour on a green tank. It adds a lift again. It's a visual interest. You could maybe put one on with the white cross as well, which is for water. Chuck one of them on there. It all adds a lift. It's a good way of creating interest, stowage. And British and American tanks were full of it. As soon as they landed, as soon as they could grab stuff in Normandy, they chucked it on the tank. So it's often something I've neglected, which I won't be in the future. I've got lots of products now where I can take parts from and use it as stowage. I've got lots of figure sets as well. Tamiya are doing some fantastic figure sets, as well as mini art. Obviously, mini art are making the thing you've never asked for, but they've got it anyway, so that's good. So there's a lot of products out there, and it's well worth adding it. Maybe instead of another tank model that we're not going to build, buying a couple of sets, something interesting might be the way forward. And I am trying to bring my models to a base as well, and I am going to show basing in a different video once I've got a grasp of it, because at the minute I do feel like I'm guessing half the time. But once I've got an idea of what I'm doing and I think it's worth sharing with you, I will share it with you. There is a video that I'll link down below that I have done for the Panzer IV base, which is probably the best I've done so far. Now, this brown, you can see, that is the filler mix. That's filler mixed with water and some brown acrylic paint. And I've put that around to fill the gaps from the balsa wood joining on to the base, which you can see there is a hefty gap there. I go back in and sort it. And also fixing the tank to the base. That's how I fixed it, just using filler. So, as much as I wouldn't turn the base upside down and shake it, it is pretty much on there as well. So that's the way I sort of went about it. You can see now the placement of the stowage. And I did, off camera, I just added a little bit of string here and there in the form of Ushi. No, I didn't. No, I actually used fine copper wire around the turret. Because the story I'm telling, if you look at some of these bits of stowage, they have like a wrap around, which is tying it, well, in a ball or whatever you want to call it. But they've also got other straps on there as well, and I'm just assuming, well, that's the straps for tying it down. So I just went with that. I didn't worry too much. You can overthink these things. But at the same time, you could easily put a bit of Ushi rigging thread, just glue it down underneath or whatever, wherever you think there's a clasp, and tie it over, and it would be fine. You could leave it black, it's already black. I'm sure there would have been black string around. And of course, we've already painted the figures, so they're in, and that brings the model to an end. So, like I said, I would show you more on the base. The only thing I can say is, very much like Night Shift shows you, is if you paint the base, rather than relying on what the products are, it's a lot easier to give a good, interesting result. So there we are. I'll leave you with some photos. Hopefully you enjoyed that build. Last week's video did go up accidentally, so I am now a week behind. Not to worry, so instead of having build videos going on and on and on, it might be interjected with some update videos, some reviews, and maybe some hints and tips videos, but it's all good. We are back and everything will be continuing on, so hope you're enjoying the content and the channel, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.